Hi, everyone. On May 22nd, Camille and I gave a presentation for the Resonant Healing Summit on relationship as a living crucible. And in it, we talked about alchemy. We did some constellation experiences to help people get a sense of it. This is more of a 40 minutes or so video with multiple resources that can be helpful in various kinds of relationships. There's a lot of material. There's a slide pack. I'm not going to read all the stuff on the slides, but you can look at them later. This is almost like a high-level tour of like, isn't this fascinating? This is what this does. Here's this. So it's kind of a little bit of a video guide that can help you pursue some things more deeply. So just a quick summary of a couple of the things that we talked about. One is that, of course, we carry fields that have multiple levels, and in relationships, these fields start to intersect. And in the question of what is in our field, there are many layers, and we went into that more in the first video. Emotional layers, biographical layers, family system layers, archetypal layers. And of course, when people come together, then all this stuff comes together. And the challenges with all of these, both attractions and these potential areas that could activate each other, how to hold this in a way that allows something meaningful to happen without it blowing up. At the end of the first presentation, we did this group constellation with these five themes or five aspects of what's important kind of from an alchemical perspective. Intention, what's the people's intentions? How strong is the container? What are the agreements? How trustworthy are people? The stance, how do we approach each other so something's more collaborative and less likely to be mutually activating? And then caring restraints, likewise, to hold back some of our more primitive and sometimes attacking responses, and caring expressions of love and care and connection. So that's all review. Now I want to use a little bit of neurobiology here to as a context. And so the front part of your brain, this orange and blue here from the outside, or these areas here in color in the inside view, is the prefrontal cortex. And this purple area is the medial prefrontal cortex. And why does that matter? Well, the medial prefrontal cortex is very related to decision making, social cognition, regulating emotions, processing social information. All these things are really important in relationship. If you can't regulate your emotions, if you misunderstand a cue, somebody smiling and you think they're trying to hurt you, or vice versa. So we want this online as much as possible. Here's another a list of some of the functions of this part of the brain, and attuned communication, emotional balance, response flexibility, to have some flexibility in how we respond rather than some kind of rigid pattern, ability to modulate fear, empathic connection, intuition, what's going on under the surface, morality. These are all very important things that we would like to have in healthy relationships. And so we'd like to keep this online as much as possible. Even more so because when one person starts to get activated or have a lot of feelings, the limbic system starts to get activated. Oftentimes, since we are mammals and we can often feel each other's feelings or get some kind of experience based on our social engagement circuit, when one person gets activated, the other person can too, and it can easily get into this chain reaction, think, you did, well, I didn't, and it just takes off, and it's just almost automatic. And if we can't bring some awareness and centeredness to us, this can happen more and more. Another layer of this, which I'll just touch on really lightly, is this also happens with unacknowledged or disowned feelings. So perhaps you went to the store and you come back and you go, wow, somebody cut me off in line, and then somebody called me a name, and somebody hit me, and that was my day. They treated me like dirt. The person's talking in a relatively flat voice. And the other person, a friend, a partner, somebody's listening to that and is getting absolutely furious because they're feeling the anger that this person's not owning. And this happens in relationships. The anger can just be projected onto the other person. They get more and more activated, then they get accused of being hysterical. This happened in traditional husband-wife relationships often. And maybe now, hopefully, men are a little more emotionally fluid, but back in the day, that was very common that the woman would be holding most of the feelings often, also for not only her own, but also for the man. And so feelings can get build up. A version of this is called projective identification or projective recruitment, where you're almost recruiting the other person to feel your feelings for you because you're not feeling them. This is not conscious. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Doesn't mean it's not intense. And I'll just mention, you might have seen this in groups sometimes too, where one person suddenly starts feeling something for the whole group. And ideally, the group will check, is that yours or is that ours? Or the group might just say, wow, you're really messed up, out. And then, of course, another person will start to feel it. Just to say that when emotions start forming, things can get pretty intense. We want to have as much capacity and groundedness as possible. So there's a lot of ways to work. This is a fascinating slide from Nicole Chu-Helbig. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can go to her website and find the article. But she looks at a lot of common approaches to couples work, including emotionally focused therapy, the Gottmans work, internal family systems, Esther Perel, and looking at it from multiple ways. And there's a lot of different ways in. I'll just look here at some of the difference here, where emotionally focused therapy looks at attachment. The Gottmans look at kind of areas that are particular problems. IFS tends to look at triggered parts. Esther Perel kind of looks at security and desire. And here's another slide of this. As I said, I'm not going to read these, but they're available. I just want to show you that this kind of information, which can really be helpful when you're trying to understand how can everybody be approaching it from all these different places, and they're still, they're so different, and yet they work. Sue Johnson looks at attachment. The Gottmans do a lot of looking at behaviors, what has been shown to predict success or failure. I mentioned internal family system with parts. So this rest of this presentation is going to look at it through this lens of the 5 things we did the constellation on. I want to start with intention and the container. What do you want from the relationship? What does the other person want? If the direction's not like this, but it's like this, then it's going to be even hard to have a container. Or you're going to have 2 ingredients that are not compatible. So this is Alison Armstrong's work. There's a link to this in the slides, where she looks at 4 different types of relationships: legacy model, family, and having children. This is the traditional, people got married to raise a family and have children. That was the priority in a lot of traditional for hundreds of years or more. Companionship model, where it's actually about the couple enjoying each other's company and being companions for each other. The rest of family, children, other things are less important. A support model where the couple actually supports each other to be themselves, but there may not be a lot of this. These are all valid, rich ways of being in relationship, as is the one with the most friction, the karma model, where people actually are looking for personal growth through challenges, and they pick somebody that'll actually kind of make them be their best self. And it may not be super comfortable, and it may not be related to children. Here, partners are attracted because they challenge each other for personal growth. This can go really well. This can go really badly. These are all fine, but if somebody is in one kind, like a karma model, and somebody else is looking for companionship and comfort, it's not a good combination to begin with. Okay. Another way to look at the relational process is the stance. We want to be cooperative and connected. As we end up in some of our more primitive circuits, then oftentimes there's this basic, instead of cooperation, is seeing or relating to the other person as an adversary and trying to shift from the adversarial stance to the we're both looking together at what the heck is going on? What did we just do? What was that? It took over. That is a profound reframing move. It's an Aikido move, and many, many different ways to do this. I'm going to talk about a few, but the key thing is just going from this, from Chernobyl into like, oh, what's happening here? One way is Sue Johnson in her emotionally focused therapy, just, I don't know, 30 some years of research, very successful, talks about identifying the demon dialogues. And she breaks it up into really three main patterns and said one of the patterns is find the bad guy. You did it. Well, now well, actually, if you wouldn't have done that, right? This is attack. You were the one that was wrong. No, you were the one that was wrong. And there's also one person attacks and one person kind of withdraws. No, I can never win. I can't do anything. No. It's not even worth talking to you. I mean, right? But there's this type of thing, attack, withdraw. And then there's freeze and flee, where both in the couple just like disconnect. This tends not to last very long. What's fascinating is people often find themselves stuck in here because there's some mutual triggering. Somebody was never listened to and somebody was always yelled at, for example, and it just creates this. And being able to identify the pattern and step out and start to work with it can be really helpful. Some of the things that often cause these really intense differences are related to polarities. Somebody wants more bonding, somebody wants more freedom, when it might shift back and forth. Somebody wants to be the fusion and differentiation. Somebody is wanting to do more things, and somebody else is kind of being with their trauma vitality. Or somebody wants to control things because there's fear, and somebody else wants to kind of surrender and open to the experience. There's a lot of tensions, and this is these archetypes are bigger than human, and they have a lot of power to them, and they can feel really righteous, and they can generate a lot of energy. And so when people, if you find a way to work with a polarity instead of being stuck in them, likewise, it gives us some way to be with them. Here's a couple more polarities. Caring for self versus caring for others. They're both important. It's not like one's right and one's wrong. Being more active, assertive, intentional, traditional masculine. Being more receptive, allowing, traditional feminine, or maybe yang and yin, or maybe terms. These are polarities, stability, flexibility, different modes of making decisions on thinking and feeling. There are a number of ways of working with polarities, and my favorite actually comes from the business world. These two books are brilliant. I suggest you start with Polarity Management. It really is a game changer in terms of looking at things that people often try to solve when they're not solvable, almost like breathing. And he talks about that. Breathing in, as it brings in oxygen and gets rid of carbon dioxide. I mean, it brings in oxygen. Breathing out gets rid of carbon dioxide. And so imagine having a fight and arguing about whether breathing in is better than breathing out. Or imagine trying to compromise. Let's just breathe half in, half out, and just stay there. No, this is a dynamic flow that's responsive to what's needed. And he goes into many polarities, really good work. Navigating polarities takes us even a step further. And I'm going to show you that. But before we do that, this is from Barry Johnson, and this happens in relationships. Being right is the easy step. Well, we have to be more specific. It's a spear. Well, we need some flexibility. Oh, it's a tree, right? our own perspective is often accurate, and so we might fight to the death to defend it, and it's often incomplete. And doing this move starts to bring more completeness. This is the worksheet for Brian Emerson's Navigating Polarities. It's pretty magnificent. It has Barry Johnson's positive and negative poles, and then brings in the third way. Like we talked, out of the one come the two, out of the two come the three, the transformational third. And what would that be like? And then what vulnerability, what risk do we have to take to be able to go beyond our traditional patterns? As I said, it's a business model, but it applies way more than that. And this is in the slides, and you can go to their website and find this. This is a little bit of the polarity diagram that I actually made. Individual focus, relational focus. What are the upsides of the individual focus? What are the upsides of the relational focus? What are the downsides of too much individual focus? What is the downsides of too much relational focus? And then being with this, like, what, and trying to sit with it, what might be something that kind of holds both? And in this case, when I was doing this, it might be like, oh, feeling the third, feeling relationship as a living being. And then, some of the, for me, is, am I willing to ask to speak up, or am I just going to sit and kind of be resentful and disconnect? And then there's some strategies. So this is just a personal exploration of this. It's a very rich process. And it's fun to do it together as a couple because, a friendship or whatever business, it's actually often when it's done with teams. Okay. Another thing, shifting gears to another part of the tour. Now we're going to stop at another port on the cruise, recognizing protest behavior. I found this really helpful because complaining, nagging, these words don't sound very good. But often these are bids for affection and attention. They're a protest. Hey, I need something. I don't feel cared for. I'd like some attention. How these are responded to is really important. In the emotion-focused therapy, Sue Johnson has this little acronym, ARE. Are you there for me? Can I reach you? Are you accessible? That's often what the protest is. Are you accessible? I want to know if you're there. Responsive, can I rely on you? Are you going to be there when I need you? Engagement, do I know that I matter? Are you going to be close? Are you going to ditch me at the party? How are these are responded to is important, because if somebody starts to do something, if you could realize it's protest behavior, of course you could say, don't talk to me like that. Person's really arrogant. Maybe that's a good thing to say, but it might just be like, wow, honey, it feels like you need something. And what are you asking for? I'm making a guess, right? Starting to look at it, there's responses to bids for attention that are positive, neutral, and negative. And when these were studied by the Gottmans, and they've done tens of thousands of hours of research, negative response obviously isn't very good. But neutral responses are actually okay. Thank you, honey. It sounds like something's going on here. You don't necessarily have to be super empathic. It's just not responding to them with more negativity. Slight stop along the cruise here. A word about nonviolent communication. There's a very rich area. Really, Marshall Rosenberg was looking for how can people relate to each other in a way that doesn't lead to violence, but leads to more heart connection. So it was designed for this. I'm just bringing the one quote, all judgments are tragic expressions of unmet needs, which is really helpful in some kind of intense situation. A little bit like this, like same as the concept of protest behavior. Oh, you never do this. Wow. Are you feeling lonely? Or are you feeling worried about, starting to look at it for the needs underneath it? You're stepping out of the blast, not taking it. And then you're wondering, like, well, what's under there, in a, curious or caring way. Another way, likewise, to work with basically people bids for attention and affection that often come out wonky because we're scared or we don't know how or triggered. Okay. Caring restraint, not harming, not dumping. It can be easy when we're in important relationships or the stakes are high to very young parts of ourselves come out and start saying and acting in ways that we wish they didn't. And the capacity to hold that in, the caring restraint, is very important. I may have mentioned this in the first part, but in Ashtanga yoga, caring restraints: don't screw around, don't cheat, don't steal. You know, those are the foundation. Then the caring expressions of loving kindness, etc. Then posture. Like, they don't start with meditation. Can you hold your energy? Because otherwise, when you start to build energy, then this is also going to get more intense. So caring restraints are really important, especially in people who maybe are not over-restrained. For some people who are over-restrained, no, they need to learn to let it loose a little bit. But the Gottmans have done some fascinating work, tens of thousands of hours, video in couples, checking, asking, doing various things. And they have 6 things that predict divorce. And one of John Gottman's quotes is, the first step to improving a marriage is understanding why relationships fail. And so that's what he studied. And like, if these things happen, then this is not so good. And if the discussion starts out really harsh, the 4 horsemen, I'll mention that in the next slide, 4 behaviors that are basically destructive to relationships: sudden flooding, body language of contempt or really like not caring, failed repair attempts. Happy couples in their studies argue as much as unhappy couples, but they don't last as long. They tend not to get as hot, and they can repair and make up rather than one person tries to come back and the other person's still going after them. And interestingly, but when you start to ask them, well, tell us about your relationship and how did it start and what was that like, is the person say, oh, yes, it was so sweet. Or was it like, yeah, actually, think about it, we kind of met and this happened, and I shouldn't have done that. Bad memories of relationship history. The 4 horses of the relational apocalypse. And this became very famous when John Gottman made the claim that he could watch a couple at a cafe for 15 minutes. It might have been 5, but anyway, he could predict what the chance that they'd be divorced within 4 years by just watching a couple at a distance in a restaurant or cafe. And what he was noticing was contempt, the most scalding, the most caustic thing in a relationship. You never, it's not just critical. It's like, you loser, you're such a, right? You can feel the contempt. That is incredibly destructive. Criticism, of course, you have to criticize the person you're with. Sometimes you need to give feedback, but the happy couples tended to have 5 positives to every negative. And the unhappy couples had less than 1 positive to 1 negative. Stonewalling, just like, it can't get to me. Now sometimes you need to take a time out, but hey, look, I can't handle this right now, I'll be back. Not, the kind of silent F you. And defensiveness. And likewise, we all get defensive if we feel attacked, but catching that, minimizing it. Whoa, I was just defensive there. Let's just pause for a minute, right? But a lot of these behaviors, particularly the top 2, are quite destructive relationships. And so, some people think, well, if you're my intimate partner, we have open season, we don't have to filter what we say. I would like to think we'd want to give the person we care about our best self. And sometimes the worst self comes out, but why feed it? So there, using the metaphor of like a meltdown, it's good to check because, as I said, we want to be in our best self. And when we get too activated, this starts to go offline and much more faster, primitive, almost reflexes and take over. And some of the reflexive behavior that we learned was not the healthiest because it was often what happened to us. So just to remember to pause occasionally, or even maybe set a timer every couple of minutes, like, how are we doing? How's our nervous systems? let me check how I'm doing. How, it's already cooperative and it's already trying to bring back to the best self. And this is fascinating, but a lot of times the Gottmans will actually put a pulse oximeter on each person in the couple as they're doing their therapy. And right now, my oxygen is 97, my pulse rate is 80. When either partner's pulse rate goes over 100, they'll pause because neurobiologically, nothing good is going to happen. And they'll shift into some other mode or they'll do something. An interesting thing to do. These cost about $40 at a lot of the drugstores. Just another a gadget for those who are a little techie, but it does make a lot of sense. If you can't check inside, you can check outside. A few other ways to prevent critical mass or cooling down the system. Of course, one is to agree to a timeout. A friend of mine who was a couples counselor said, if I only had one thing to tell couples, just that you both agree that either person can call a timeout, and of course, to set the check back in so it doesn't feel like abandonment. And another is to use a prearranged signal or flashcards. And this sounds really strange, but there's a book called Talk to Me Like I'm Someone You Love. And oftentimes when people get triggered, even if you said something stupid and you're like, geez, I'm sorry. Sometimes if there's even like 1 or 2% edge in the voice, the other person just gets activated by it. And sometimes it's actually nice to take the time, and she actually has preloaded flashcards of like, and hold it up. It's kind of sweet. It pauses, it changes the energy. The other thing is sometimes we don't really know what's going on. We're just activated. And I like her book. I'll show you a picture of it in just a bit. But having language for what's going on, calms the brain and tends to calm the nervous system. It's just realizing, oh, I'm not feeling heard. That's what's going on. So interesting idea. Some of these feel a little gimmicky, but they really take the work off of trying to get to the best part of ourselves when there's all these challenges. Okay, one of the last stops on the journey here, caring expressions. You may be familiar with the 5 love languages. This is one slide about them. People studied in that there's different ways of giving and receiving love, and some mean more to some people than others. Many people have 1 or 2 favorites. Words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, physical touch. There are others, and I believe the love language, this whole thing has been expanded, but you can either do a Google search and find a lot about this. This is a good example of where the golden rule doesn't work, because my love language might be quality time, and my partner's love language might be acts of service. It's like, I think I'm doing exactly what I would want and I need. And it's like, I need some help with the chores, honey, right? That type of, and of course, if one of these is missing, then oftentimes it starts to call for attention. But this is a nice mindfulness practice to kind of check, how are we doing with these or others? Empathy, connection, and of course, I like this quote, the resonance of love is a vibration that harmonizes heart to heart. Or Barbara Friedrichsen's book, Love 2.0, where she proposes that when we feel felt, when I feel you feeling me, it registers in the nervous system. There's a calming, there's a bonding, and actually registers as loving care. She calls this positivity resonance. This happens with children with their parents. This happens with friends. This happens with coaches, therapists, other people. Sarah Payton and Jaya offer the resonant language and the resonant healing work. And in her books, Your Resonant Self and Your Resonant Self Workbook, There's a lot about resonant language and interpersonal resonance. The whole Resonant Healing Summit was based on resonance. And she describes 9 forms of resonant language that help settle the nervous system, help connect the hemispheres, and also help connect somebody to somebody else so they feel felt. This is a whole course in itself as well. As I said, there's fast stops along the tour. Sorry, the boat can't stay very long. One thing I want to mention, because when you have a new tool, you want to use it for everything. Empathy doesn't work for everything. And Terry Real, who works with difficult couples, particularly difficult men, but difficult couples, says clearly that empathy is very healing and helpful when the problem is shame, but it's not very helpful when dealing with somebody who's grandiose and think they deserve and you don't deserve and that kind of thing. Working with grandiosity requires finding leverage. Terry has more of a kind of connecting, but also kind of being tough love. Mr. A, you realize you have a wonderful partner here who is about to leave. And, you learned some things when you were younger and they weren't really helpful and you might not know what to do. But, if you're willing to work on this, I'm happy to teach you how to be, how to treat her well and your children so that they won't feel about you the way you feel about your family. And they does this work. There's some great videos if you Google Terry Real, but this is a big insight, and he's very very open about this because he thinks this is one of the reasons why people don't do couples work sometimes as therapists, because they don't know how to work with grandiosity, and it's not uncommon. Okay, some books along the way as we start to close this out. Sue Johnson's book, Hold Me Tight, really well done. It's actually designed, and there's also now a workbook that people can use based on this. She talks about her 7 stages, and I mentioned the demon dialogues, finding raw spots where people's triggers touch each other, and then they basically work through this and then start to work through the positives. Very lovely work. This is the flashcard book, Talk to Me Like I'm Someone You Love. That the newer version doesn't just have the flashcards in it, but it has a description about each of about 110 different sentences that are really insightful, and they're really fun to just sit by even and look with somebody. Wow, actually, yeah, I'd love to say this sometimes. How about you? It's a bestseller for good reason. And in closing, I wish you well. This is a slides from the Alchemical text, The Splendor Solace, which is a much bigger text, but these are the prints, which is related to kind of personal transformation. And these are prints from the Rosarium Philosophorum, which work with the unity or the conjunction of opposites and transcendent third to create something really powerful. And with that, I want to say thank you. There's a link to the slides. There's a lot of material in the slides, which hopefully from this research, you'll be able to take something of value with it. And thank you for your attention, and I wish you well.